The Sacred Treasures video did well, and whether that was out of spite or because people actually wanted me to talk about 7 deadly sins on this page, here we are. I am nothing if not a shill for views. And as somebody who has consumed pretty much every piece of media that 7 Deadly Sins has ever released, much to my shame, I'm pretty qualified to talk about the show and the manga. The scariest thing about all of this is that the video that did well was about the sacred treasures, just weapons that the 7 Deadly Sins wield. Not about the 7 Deadly Sins, not even about the 10 Commandments, about the weapons that the 7 Deadly Sins wield. And while weapons are awesome, they pale in comparison to people's interest to the characters from the show. So apparently, 7 Deadly Sins has now worked its way into our rotation. But if we've already covered the most important thing of all of 7 Deadly Sins, the weapons that the 7 Deadly Sins wield, what possibly will we cover now? Oh, I don't know, we could probably talk about the people who wield those weapons, like the 7 Deadly Sins. I feel like that video would do pretty well. And alas, here we are. See, the 7 Deadly Sins, like it or not, are one of the most prolific anime groups ever. Composed of 7 magical knights of incredibly varying backgrounds, they are humanity's last hope against demonkind. And the weapons they wield are as unique as the wielders themselves. Within the confines of the 7 Deadly Sins, there is a giant, a doll, the king of the fairies, a demon, 2 somewhat immortals, and Escanor. I'd call it the most diverse group in anime, but the Akatsuki have a shark person. And how many shark people do the 7 Deadly Sins have? 0. But shark people or not, the power of the 7 Deadly Sins is not to be underestimated. With people like Merlin, the actual agent of chaos, or Meliodas, who becomes the Demon King, or Bon, who's able to battle against the Demon King, they are undoubtedly one of the strongest anime groups ever. But how do they stack up against each other? Who in the 7 Deadly Sins truly punches the hardest? And where does every single member of the Sins fall in the pecking order amongst each other? Well, since the manga has been over for almost 3 years now, oh my god, I'm old, it's pretty easy to definitively say where each member of the 7 Deadly Sins falls into the pecking order. Which is why today we're talking the 7 Deadly Sins ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me ranking things, or explaining things, or possibly doing both, you're gonna love my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So the Sins, every single one of them, some of the strongest people in their entire universe. However, just as with all groups, some members are gonna be stronger than others. While some members specialize in offensive output, others specialize in defensive output. Some members are healers, some members are support, and some members are giants. Now, if somebody was 30 feet tall and able to wield a hammer that weighed 2,000 pounds, you would assume they'd be the strongest person around, especially if that person's essentially an earthbender who's able to create entire mountains and nullify all magic that is fired at her. However, unfortunately, in the case of Diane, that's not the case. Because coming in at number 7 and in last place, we have Diane. Because here's the thing, while Diane is absolutely my #1 waifu in the 7 Deadly Sins universe, and was my #1 waifu overall for a long time, that doesn't unfortunately give her any boost to strength. There's no moral victories in this list. Diane is the serpent sin of envy. She's a member of the Giant Clan, and she wields the Warhammer Gideon, which she uses in tandem with her power Creation. Now, Creation is an ability specific to the Giant Clan. However, the most talented user we see of it is Diane, obviously. This ability allows members of the Giant Clan to do whatever they want with the earth. They can create giant towers. They can bend iron as if it were made of rubber. They can turn the earth into sand. But beyond this, uses of Creation are also able to turn their body into metal, which not only increases their density, but their mass massively, which means that any punches delivered by a metal Diane are not only harder, but also carry more momentum. Now, the level of ability of a certain giant to use Creation is actually dependent on their connection to the earth, and thus many giants have to learn how to perform something known as Droll's Dance, which can deepen their connection to the earth and therefore strengthen their power. And Diane knows the dance. She goes on a whole little arc where she has to reconnect to the earth, and she becomes much more powerful because of it. Though some are born with a natural affinity and a deep connection to the earth, like Diane. I mean, obviously, she's one of the main characters of the show. And because Diane's connection to the earth is so powerful, she's able to do things like generate massive stone golems. And she uses her Creation ability for a myriad of very scary attacks, like Mother Catastrophe, where Diane strikes the ground as hard as she can with Gideon radiant and launches a mountain-sized amount of debris into the air. She then brings all of that debris together and essentially drops a mountain on her opponent. This technique has been shown to be able to wipe out entire towns. She also has an ability known as Ground Gladius, which is able to destroy a combination magic move known as Dragon Castle, which created a massive electrified tornado capable of wiping out entire towns, and she nullified that in one attack, with a Gladius so large it was able to be seen from the other side of the capital with ease. But as the manga went further, Diane realized that she had to find a way to make her Earth stronger, and thus Diane stopped dealing with rocks and started dealing with diamonds, as Diane has two abilities known as Diamond Shield and Diamond Tower that allow her to either create a massive diamond shield or a massive spawning diamond tower that can strike an enemy with an incredibly hard substance, giving Diane an incredibly dangerous weapon and an impenetrable defense. On top of all this, people like Meliscula believe that Diane will one day surpass the power of even Droll, the first king of the giants. In fact, even Droll believed that one day Diane would surpass his power, and considering the fact that multiple times throughout the manga Diane's strength is compared to that of Meliodas, the assertion that she may surpass Droll one day is nothing crazy, especially when you consider the fact that according to the final guidebook, Diane's power level is 50,000 plus. Now, power level, if you're not an avid consumer of all things Seven Deadly Sins, won't really mean anything to you until we start talking about other characters. But just so you know, the first time that Diane ever had her power level read, it read at 3,250. So she made a lot of progress. But there are some people who actively stunted that progress, and the biggest culprit of that crime is none other than our number 6 entry, Gowther. Gowther is the goat sin of lust, and he wields the twin bow Herod. Gowther's backstory is a bit weird. Gowther is actually a doll created by a great wizard thousands of years ago in the form of that great wizard's old lover. And Gowther, just like Meliodas, is also a former member of the 10 Commandments. However, Gowther was acting as a stand-in for the great wizard that made him during his 10 Commandment days. Now, Gowther uses his sacred treasure, the twin bow Herod, in conjunction with his ability Invasion. Now, Invasion is a magical technique shared between Gowther and the great wizard that made him. And Invasion gives Gowther the ability to manipulate somebody's memories and soul, which is kind of broad, but that kind of makes sense because Invasion can do a lot, which is probably why Dreyfus said that it was the most dangerous out of all of the powers that the 7 deadly sins wield. See, Invasion basically gives Gowther free reign over your memory and soul, which means that Gowther can do things like trap you and a fond memory. And all Gowther has to do to trap you in this fond memory is make contact with you or fire an arrow of light into your head using the twin bow Herod. And while being trapped in a fond memory sounds nice, while you're trapped in said fond memory, your body can't move, which means Escanor could just walk up to you and slice you in half. But Invasion can also be worse, as Gowther is also able to use Invasion to tread into your subconscious to talk to you in your own mind, which is good for sharing secrets or trapping somebody's body and making them unable to move because while Gowther's in there talking to you, once again, you can't move. And since Gowther has the ability to read the memories and soul of anybody around him, it's impossible to lie to him. But the manipulation goes a little bit further than the soul and memories. See, since soul is kind of a loose term, the best way to think about it is that Gowther has the ability to control your mind, and thus Gowther has the ability to control your nervous system, to make you move in any way that he deems fit, or he can knock you unconscious, or he can alter your senses. Pretty much Invasion gives Gowther the right to do whatever with your body he wants to. So it is a pretty terrifying ability, and considering the fact that all he needs to do is fire an arrow of light, which presumably travels somewhere around the speed of light into your head in order to get this invasion technique off, it's kind of scary, and that's without considering the fact that the other way you can do it is just by making contact with you. And since these arrows that Gowther fires are made of light, they pass through any shields or armor, which is why Gowther's ability, Rewrite Light, is so terrifying. Because with this ability, Gowther can fire off multiple light arrows into a slew of enemies, and regardless of how big your shield is or how much armor you're wearing, this ability can rewrite any memories that Gowther wants to rewrite. Now, this rewrite isn't forever. Once you realize the inconsistencies in these new memories, you're able to remember what your old memories were. But let's say hypothetically, you're about to slash me and I fire an arrow of light into your brain that makes you think we're best friends. For the next couple of minutes, you're on my side. And it can be worse than that. He also has an ability known as Nightmare Teller, which just casts you into your most traumatizing memories that you have a possibility of never waking up from. So just comatose in the worst time of your life. He also has the ability Blackout. This ability allows Gowther to envelop everything within a 3-mile radius of him with his magic. And anybody within this 300-mile radius with a magical rating of under 400 just goes unconscious immediately. Now, he can channel this blackout power into an individual arrow, and this arrow, if it hits somebody, renders them unconscious immediately. Now, with the power of this arrow, Gowther was able to knock out Escanor. Now, of course, the arrow's power was increased by Merlin, but still, very impressive. Gowther also has abilities like Kill Switch that allow him to deactivate somebody's entire magical technique, or Break Her Off, which paralyze people for 10 seconds by disconnecting their nerve endings from each other so they can't send signals to the brain. Or Lost World, the technique that he uses on Diane that make them forget basically everything about their life. But more importantly than anything, it deletes the memories of all of your loved ones. But these aren't even Gowther's most powerful attacks. Gowther's most powerful attacks come in the form of combination attacks, like his combined technique Celestial Arrow attack, where Gowther fires Chastity, King's sacred treasure, instead of a light arrow, and this attack is so powerful that it not only affects you physically, but mentally. So not only is your arm gone, but you're also being cast into your worst memories ever. But Gowther doesn't always need other people to achieve his true power, as technically the strongest thing that Gowther has access to is the Forbidden Spell. See, the Forbidden Spell is a spell so powerful that it's able to affect the Demon King and possibly the Supreme Deity, who are the two strongest entities in the universe, so long as you don't count Chaos. It's weird, we'll get into it. Now, the original Gowther, the one that Gowther the doll is based off of, used a spell to make everybody who knew Archangel Mael believe that he was actually Estarossa. However, using this ability was so taxing that it actually cost the original Gowther their life. But since Doll Gowther has all of the abilities of original Gowther, Doll Gowther could use this. And on top of having Invasion and the twin bow hair, since Gowther is a doll, he's kind of invulnerable. He's taken point-blank shots from Dale and Diane, he's had his neck broken and got back up and just snapped it back. He's been beheaded by Hendrickson, only for Gowther's body to move, snag his head, and place it back. However, this doesn't mean that Gowther can't be killed, as we've seen people like Mael have the ability to impart so much damage to Gowther that he begins to actually be damaged. And if things are going really bad for Gowther, he's also equipped with a self-destruct device. One created by Merlin that uses Escanor's Sunshine as a base, and then you take Sunshine as a base and add the 4 elements of destruction, and then maximize those 4 elements of destruction with the spell Infinity, and therefore if Gowther self-destructs, it destroys everything within a 10-mile radius of him. But enough about people who are mean to Diane, let's talk about people who married Diane, because coming in at number 5, we have King. King, outside being the winner of the worst haircut upgrade, is the king of the fairies. In fact, King is regarded as the strongest ever fairy king. He achieves a lot of this power with his Spirit Spear Chastiful, which is his sacred treasure. It never leaves his side. And King uses Chastiful in conjunction with his inherent power, Disaster. Now, there's a lot to get into when describing the powers of King. So let's go over his inherent power first. Disaster. Disaster is a technique shared by all fairy kings, which means that Gloxina, Dahlia, and King have all had Disaster. Disaster gives you complete reign over life and death, which is necessary for a fairy king to rule over the fairy forest. See, this ability, since it controls life and death, allows fairy kings to propagate massive forests or wipe out pestilence affecting the fairy realm. But it can affect a lot more than just trees. King uses Disaster to enact an ability known as Status Promotion, which allows him to turn small scratches into gaping wounds. It also allows him to do things like affect people's aching joints and making their joints worse. King can go further than this. King can make a mild poison into a deadly toxin. King could make a small tumor metastasize across somebody's entire body. All things in the acceleration or deceleration of life and death, King can control. Now, King uses this Disaster ability to be able to change the shape of Chastiful, which just has so many forms. See, Chastiful for a long time was just Spirit Spear Chastiful, which is supposed to have 10 forms, but we only ever saw 8. Now, these forms allow Chastiful to be anything from a spear to a bunch of kunai to a giant bear that King can control kind of like an avatar. It could also turn into a giant sunflower that was able to shoot laser beams at enemies. It could even go so far as using Form 8, Pollen Garden, which creates a large barrier around a person that's impervious to pretty much all attacks in the 7 Deadly Sins universe, while also healing and subduing the pain of who's ever within the Pollen Garden. However, when King finally learns how to draw out the true power of the sacred tree, which Spirit Spear Chastiful is made from, he's able to use the true Spirit Spear Chastiful, which floods King's body with magic, which for a long time King wasn't able to handle until he got his true wings, at which point he became the true Fairy King, so his body could handle the increase of magic. And with this new form of Chastiful, pretty much all of the forms are the same, they're just stronger. Form 2 Guardian is still a giant bear, but the giant bear is now ripped ripped and way more powerful. Form 4 Sunflower is still a sunflower, but the sunflower has teeth now and it can shoot way more projectiles. Form 5 Increase still creates kunai, but now the kunai are bigger. But it also brings about a new form, Form 6 Yagdr Cloth, which creates a suit of armor with blades on the wrists for King to wear. But technically King goes even further than that, because eventually he gets a form known as Awakened True Form, which happens after he fully develops his wings. Let me clarify. So King awakens to True Spirit Spear Chastable before he fully unlocks his wings, and he's able to tap into this mode occasionally. But after he fully forms his wings and becomes the True Fairy King, he gets his Awakened True Form, which is when he gets the terrible hair. And that form has entirely different upgrades to Chastable. And all the forms are the same, but even stronger this time. Like Form 2 Guardian is now so powerful, it's able to stop Zeldris from attacking Merlin. And just a weapon being able to stop Zeldris is kind of scary when you consider the fact that Zeldris at one point gets a Demon King form, just like Meliodas. And that's pretty much the strongest thing you can get in the anime. But honestly, the craziest upgrade is to Form 8, Pollen Garden. Because now, not only is Pollen Garden able to heal multiple people at once, fully and immediately, it's also able to withstand attacks from people like Mael, one of the 4 Archangels. Now, after awakening to his wings, King's power level is measured at 41,600. However, just like with Diane in the last data book, his power level is rated at 50,000 plus, as technically the data book entry pertains to both King and Diane. But I know what you're saying.
Nick, if King and Diane have the same power level ranking, why is King 2 levels higher than her?
Basically just everything he did in the manga and anime. Like, without him, the 7 Deadly Sins most likely wouldn't have been able to defeat Chimera Indra, as King was the only person with enough AoE offensive output to destroy all of the babies that Chimera Indra was trying to create. And the fact that he was more heavily involved in the battle against the Demon King than either of the 2 people previously mentioned on this list. But that fight was more just about Meliodas versus the Demon King, if we're being real. But enough about kings, let's move to our number 4 entry on this list, Bon. Yes, I believe that Bon is more powerful than King. He's just got better feats. Bon is the fox sin of greed, and his sacred treasure is the holy weapon Korchos. Korchus? I don't know how to say it. I think it's Korchus. Now, for a long time, a large amount of Bon's strength came from the fact that he was invulnerable. No matter what you did to him, if you cut his head off, if you blew him up into little bits, he would always come back to life. Now, this is because he drank the entirety of the Fountain of Youth in the fairy realm. However, he no longer has that immortality, as he had to give it up in order to resurrect Elaine. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't acquired a massive amount of strength. He has. See, Bon's holy rod that shall go unnamed isn't that great so far as sacred treasures go, which is why Bon is the last person to get his sacred treasure. In fact, he doesn't get it back until the 7 Deadly Sins are fighting against Chimera Indra, which is the second to last fight in the manga. Really, all that these glorified nunchucks do for Bon is bring out his latent power, like the sacred treasures do for all of the other 7 Deadly Sins. Outside of that, it has the ability to lengthen the rod parts of the nunchucks and distort its chain lengths, which means if hypothetically you believe that you are outside of the range of Bon's nunchucks, no, you're not. And if you believe that you've dodged Bon's nunchucks, once again, now you have not. Because even though the nunchucks appear as though they're gonna miss you, Bon can either increase the length of the rod or change the angle of the chain so that the nunchucks actually hit you, which makes battling against or guessing where these nunchucks are gonna be all but impossible. Pretty much anywhere that Bon needs these nunchucks to be, they will be. Now, the Holy Rod does confer one ability to Bon, and that's Super Concentration, which increases Bon's accuracy and speed to a superhuman level. And by using this technique, Bon was actually able to destroy thousands of Chimera Indra's spawn before they could get to civilized areas, making Bon the only other person outside of King and I believe Diane who was responsible for making sure that Chimera Indra didn't take over the entire country. But the Holy Rod is not what makes Bon powerful. What makes Bon powerful, outside of his inherent ability Snatch, which we'll go over in a second, is the fact that he spent a significant stint in Purgatory. See, Bon enters Purgatory looking for Meliodas, and because time is kind of woogity in Purgatory, Bon spends years there. But because Purgatory is pretty much the worst place you can be, Bon, having to survive there, became much more powerful. So much so that his endurance and durability are pretty much the highest out of anybody in the Sins. In fact, his durability is so high after surviving Purgatory that it's almost like he never lost his immortality. See, because while regular attacks used to be able to injure or even kill Bon, he could always recover. But now his durability is so high that basically nothing can injure or kill him in the first place, meaning no recovery necessary. This is perfectly demonstrated by the fact that Bon tanks an energy storm attack from the Demon King, which apparently, according to Gowther, is supposed to wipe out any living thing. Bon then goes on to tank multiple shots from the Demon King with minor injuries, and was able to take the Supreme Deity's God Thunder, which injured Diane, Gowther, and King. And he was just completely fine. Bond goes on to say that the attacks from the Supreme Deity and the Demon King are nothing compared to Purgatory, and those are the two primordial gods of the universe. But this is mostly because Bond has been fighting the Demon King for centuries, as the person that Bond had to go through in Purgatory to get to Meliodas was the Demon King. But when the Demon King takes over Meliodas' body, Bond is the only person who can stand up to him. And mind you, prior to fighting Bond, Meliodas as the Demon King wiped out the other sins and two of the strongest archangels in existence. And he battles against this version of the Demon King all without using Snatch, which is his inherent ability, which allows Bond to rob physical objects. He usually uses it to rip people's hearts out of their chest. However, Bond is also able to steal physical power from somebody else and use it to strengthen himself while weakening them. But he can only steal so much power, as Bond, just like King before his wings came in, has a limit to how much magical power he can bring into his body. So yeah, for the small feat of being able to battle against the Demon King for several centuries and then battle against the Demon King when he took over Meliodas' body, we're gonna put Bond pretty high on this list. But not as high as our number 3 entry on this list, Merlin. See, Merlin has forever been regarded as the greatest mage in Britannia. However, for the large majority of the manga, we didn't understand that Merlin was actually much stronger than that. Merlin is the boar sin of gluttony and wields the sacred treasure Aldan. Now, Aldan is weird. We don't really know anything about it. We just know that Merlin channels the majority of her magic through it. We know that she can use it as a scrying eye of sorts to see locations, and that she channels her magic through it, and that she can transfer her soul to it if her physical body is in harm's way. But that's about all we know about Aldan, because Merlin overall is kind of an enigma. I mean, even the name Merlin is made up because Merlin's true name is unpronounceable to humans. What's not an enigma, however, is Merlin's inherent ability, Infinity. Infinity allows Merlin a rather weird magical ability. Essentially, Infinity allows Merlin to keep whatever magical spell that she casts going until she decides to dispel them. So much in a similar capacity to how Amaterasu burns forever until you turn to ash, or the user of Amaterasu shuts it off, any technique that Merlin uses will go forever until she dispels them. And these spells will exist even after Merlin's death. And this is applied to any magic that she uses, regardless of how powerful it is. And thus, if Merlin casts her most powerful magic, it will exist forever, only at the cost of using that spell once. And Merlin uses this ability in a myriad of different ways, encompassing people in ice forever, causing flames to burn endlessly like Amaterasu, or even going so far as to stop time for herself, which is why she doesn't age, even though she's over 3,000 years old. But that's not the only way that Merlin's kind of a walking cheat code. She also has a technique called Enchant Infinity, which allows Merlin to channel an infinite amount of magical energy into a spell to make it basically infinitely more powerful. The best way that we've seen her use this technique is when she used it to make her Exterminate Ray more powerful. And she used this ability in chapter 290 to completely overwhelm the magic of Chandler, a devil so powerful he was responsible for training the majority of the 10 Commandments. And she would actually go on to defeat both Chandler and Kuzak in battle, who are the two highest ranking devils. Even Ludacil, the leader of the 4 Archangels, said that he would never want Merlin as an enemy. The real reason that Merlin is as powerful as she is because she has the blessing of both the Supreme Deity and the Demon King. And because of this, she's gained immunity to all brainwashing and possession techniques. On top of this, things like the commandments of the 10 Commandments don't actually affect her, which is why she's freed from things like the Truth Commandment or the Pacifism Commandment. But because she has the blessing of both the Demon King and the Supreme Deity, she's also free to roam in either the Demon Realm or the Angel Realm, which is how she was able to unlock all the mysteries of the Demon Realm and figure out things like Perfect Cube and Absolute Order, with Perfect Cube being a spell originating from the Demon Realm that's able to reflect any attack, regardless of the strength, directly back at the user, and only allows the caster of the spell to enter. Nobody else. And the ability Absolute Order giving her the ability to delete things from existence, like the branch ability Absolute Cancel, which gives her the ability to place her hands on any magic and delete it from existence. So, you use some fire magic? Well, if Merlin gets her hands on it, she can delete that fire magic from existence. No one will ever use it again. Now, the more powerful the magic, the higher the possibility that Merlin isn't able to delete it forever, but instead just kind of like indefinitely suspends it. And she could be more powerful, as Arthur Pendragon believes that she is the perfect person to be the host of Chaos. Now, Chaos is the creator of the universe, the thing that made both the Demon King and the Supreme Deity. Kind of like the Big Bang of the Seven Deadly Sins universe, and Merlin's key motivation throughout the entirety of the Seven Deadly Sins history is to unlock Chaos, who was sealed away by the two gods that it created. But enough about Merlin, let's talk about big burly bros who are objectively obsessed with Merlin, because coming in at number 2, we have Escanor. Escanor is the lion's sin of pride, the former second prince of the kingdom of Castilio, and the wielder of the sacred treasure, the divine axe Rita, which is the perfect complement for his inherent power, Sunshine. Now, Sunshine is actually a grace that was previously bestowed upon Mael, one of the 4 archangels. See, the power was originally created by the Supreme Deity, but when Gowther used the forbidden spell to turn Mael into Estarossa, the grace was abandoned, and then 3,000 years later, it found a new host in Escanor. Now, the grace does go back to Mael for a little bit, but Mael eventually gives the grace back to Escanor so he can battle against the Demon King. The way that Sunshine works is pretty simple. Those bestowed with the grace of Sunshine gather strength during the day. That is to say that the more sunshine that they get, the stronger they become, which means at high noon for 1 whole minute, they're the strongest they could possibly be. But this also means at midnight, Escanor is as weak as he could be, as all the strength gathered during the day wanes as the sun sets. Technically, that would make me believe that the weakest Escanor could be would be like 4 a.m., but what do I know? But the power granted to Escanor during the day is no joke. The heat that emanates from Escanor during the day is so hot that it's able to melt metal and vaporize rocks. In fact, Merlin compares his body during the day to the actual sun. During the daytime, Escanor's magical power increases by 5 every second. And when the clock strikes noon, Escanor grows considerably in size. Not only does he grow in size, his magical power also grows, with Escanor being able to create miniature suns purely out of magical power. Now, this form that Escanor achieves at noon is referred to as the One, an invincible incarnation of power according to Merlin. And in this form, Escanor is one of, if not the most powerful person in the universe. In this form, Escanor is able to go toe-to-toe with Meliodas in assault mode, which outside of Demon King Meliodas is Meliodas' strongest form, a form where Meliodas turns off all of his emotions and thought and just channels all of his power into offensive output. Not to mention, in this form, he was also able to overcome Zeldris' strongest ability, Ominous Nebula, which even Ludociel was powerless to resist. And outside of shrugging off one of the most powerful attacks in the entire universe, the One was also able to almost fatally wound Zeldris with a poke. However, since Sunshine technically belongs to the Goddess clan, Escanor using it does chip away at his life force. Now, fortunately for Escanor, he doesn't only have to be confined to using this power during the day. That's what Divine Axe Rita is for, as Escanor is actually able to channel his Sunshine Grace into Rita, which allows him to not only launch fire attacks from the axe, but also channel that power into the axe for later usage. So basically what I'm saying is that Escanor is able to channel excess sunshine into Rita so that when the sun goes down, he can hold on to Rita and maintain his sunshine form, which relies on Rita's ability Charge in Fire. However, Escanor can also use Charge in Fire to just release all of the sunshine charged up in Rita to evaporate everything near him. And because he was able to battle against our number 1 spot in his strongest form, and an actual Archangel believed that he was better suited to wield sunshine in the battle against the Demon King, we're gonna give Escanor the number 2 spot. But I've already spoiled who's gonna be at number 1, but let's be real, you knew it was coming. Coming in at number 1, we have Meliodas. Who would have thought? Meliodas is the dragon sin of wrath, and former member of the 10 Commandments, Meliodas the Love. He wields the sacred treasure Lost Vein, which he uses to use his inherent ability Full Counter at its highest level. Now, Lost Vein is probably the worst out of all of the sacred treasures, but Meliodas didn't need the boost. Lost Vein grants Meliodas the ability to make clones of himself. However, the more clones that Meliodas makes, the weaker they get. A lot like Shadow Clone Jutsu. The best way to describe how Lost Vein works is that if Meliodas' power level is 4,000, if he makes 1 clone, that clone's power level will be 2,000. The way that this is better than Shadow Clones technically is that it doesn't half Meliodas' power. But if Meliodas were to hypothetically make 4 clones with a 4,000 power level, each of those clones would have a power level of 500. But once again, Meliodas retains his original power level. But the good thing about Lost Vein's clones is that every single one of them has the ability to use Full Counter. And since the usage of Full Counter isn't technically dependent on how strong you are, having weak clones isn't actually the end of the world, as even if Meliodas' clones only have a power level of 200, they can still Full Counter a 3,000 power level attack. attack. And that's powerful because full counter is powerful. Full counter allows you to reflect the attacks of your opponent back at them with double the power. Therefore, the stronger the attacks that are launched at you, the stronger the attacks that are coming back at them. But there are also two different kinds of full counter. One that reflects magical attacks and another that reflects physical attacks. Meliodas has the magical attack kind. And thus, if you just try to attack Meliodas with a sword, he can't full counter you. But there's also ways that Meliodas can make his full counter stronger, with the best example being revenge counter, where Meliodas turns off all of his abilities and takes as much damage as possible. He then turns his abilities back on and channels all of his power into a revenge counter. That is to say that all of the power and damage inflicted to him is actually reversed onto his opponent after he reactivates his technique. And this is referred to as Meliodas' ultimate technique. And while that may be Meliodas' ultimate technique, it is not his ultimate form. See, Meliodas has had a long history. He's the son of the Demon King. He was once the leader of the 10 Commandments and was considered the only worthy heir to the Demon King throne. In fact, Meliodas is so strong that him abandoning the Demon Clan is actually what started the Holy War, as the demons were massively more powerful than the Goddess Clan for thousands of years, but once Meliodas decided to defect, they lost a large amount of their fighting force. And honestly, everything that we've ever seen from the strongest versions of Meliodas very much corroborates this fact. See, we've seen that Meliodas is capable of doing things like beating Gloxina and Droll simultaneously. That is the first Fairy King and the first Giant King at the same time. Even before the end of the manga, we've saw that when Meliodas got serious, he could defend himself against his father, the Demon King. And when he recovered the power that was taken from him by Merlin, the aftershock created by that power surging into him could be felt 100 kilometers away. Before the series even started, Meliodas' power was so legitimate that he destroyed the entire kingdom of Danafor, which is why Merlin stole a large amount of his power away from him to make sure that he wouldn't do the same thing to Leon. But once that power was returned to him, he was strong enough to defeat pretty much every single one of the 10 Commandments. And even that is said to only be a fraction of the power that he wielded during the Holy War. But it's not until Meliodas has to break free of Meliscula's grip that he actually regains his demon powers. And once he regains his demon powers, he regains Assault Mode. And in this Assault Mode, Meliodas was toying with Escanor until Escanor achieved the 1. At which point Escanor was able to defeat Assault Mode Meliodas. However, Zeldris thinks that the only reason that Meliodas lost in that fight is because he was underestimating Escanor. And even after almost being cut in half by Escanor, Meliodas recovered almost instantaneously. See, it wasn't until Merlin stepped in that Meliodas was truly subdued. Because the problem is, what Assault Mode gives Meliodas in power, it takes in his rationale and emotions. And after he awakes from the catatonic state that Merlin puts him in, he immediately beats Zeldris and Esterosa, with the former having a boost from the Demon King. He also manages to go unscathed by attacks from Arthur, who's wielding Excalibur, the strongest weapon in the 7 Deadly Sins universe. In fact, his aura is so intimidating that it outshines all 4 of the archangels simultaneously. Not to mention that just like his brothers, Meliodas is able to remove commandments from the 10 Commandments. And he, like Zeldris, is able to absorb other commandments. And he is the only person outside of Zeldris who's able to maintain more than one commandment in their body simultaneously. So what does Meliodas do? Well, he absorbs all of the commandments, giving him half of the power of the Demon King. And what does Meliodas go on to do? Well, defeat the Demon King and become the new Demon King, which means he's acquired so much power that he technically can't even exist in Britannia anymore without destroying it because of the weather phenomenon that would happen through him existing in the mortal plane. On top of this, before even becoming the Demon Slayer, Meliodas figured out how to break the curse on him and Elizabeth in Purgatory, which was implemented on them by the Supreme Deity and the Demon King. Meaning before he even absorbed all the 10 Commandments and became the new Demon King, he was able to counteract magic from the Demon King and the Supreme Deity, 2 gods of the universe. So yeah, obviously he's the strongest member of the 7 Deadly Sins, and it's not necessarily close. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my list? Would you have shifted it in any way? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. If somehow this video does worse than the video ranking and explaining the weapons that the people that I just ranked and explained use, I will admit I know nothing about YouTube.